Hi, my name is David Sickfeld, and I am the chair of the Jewish Federation of Northeastern New York. I appreciate you're all coming here this evening to join us for this very important fundraising event, and it's in time of needs that the Federation is here to help our friends in Israel. I know, like, if you're like me, I feel helpless in this time. I watch the news. We can't change the way it's portrayed. What we can do tonight is listen to our good friends, Dr. Stephen Berk and Hank Greenberg, in trying to provide sufficient funds for us to be able to assist our friends in Israel. At this time, I am honored to introduce our Master of Ceremonies, Hank Greenberg. Hank is the immediate past president of the New York State Bar Association, the largest voluntary state bar association in the nation, a former counsel to the New York State Attorney General, general counsel to a major New York State agency, and a federal prosecutor. Hank had handled numerous high-profile matters. He concentrates his practice on civil litigation, criminal and civil investigations, and regulatory and administrative law. Hank, we are so grateful to have you here with us this evening, and without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, David, for the privilege and the honor to be with everyone this evening as our community comes together as one yet again, as we watch across the world our brothers and sisters in Israel suffering as they are. In the course of our lifetime, the arc of many of our lifetimes, in my case, from the War of Independence to the present, we have as a community gathered as we are this evening, albeit in the past in person, but now owing to COVID, virtually, to share our feelings and our beliefs and our desire to try to help our co-religionists in Israel. And it seems as though, as frequently in years past as we tragically came together, it has been 7 years since our community has needed to be amongst one another as we are today. And for many of us, we've been lulled into a false sense of security about how vulnerable Israel is. Well, the events of the last several days have demonstrated to us, has reminded us, as if we needed a reminder, about the frightening, terrifying specter of anti-Semitism in Israel and across the globe. It has reminded us of the vulnerability, the fragility of the state of Israel. It has reminded us of the ever-present threat and danger of terrorism in Israel. And it's reminded us of our obligation to one another, to Jews everywhere, and most particularly in Israel. That's what we're here to talk tonight. And we are blessed this evening because, once again, all of us have the honor, the privilege, the rare gift of being able to hear from one of our nation, frankly, one of our world's preeminent thinkers, speakers, lecturers, authors of all things Jewish, and most notably amongst his diverse and extraordinary knowledge about the threat and the risks that Israel faces today and historically. Of course, I'm speaking of none other than Dr. Stephen Berk, the Henry and Sally Schaefer Professor of Holocaust and Jewish Studies at Union College. He is the former director of the History Department. He is the former head of its programming for Russian and Eastern European Studies. He is a nationally, internationally recognized author and lecturer. I could go on for a long time. But for this crowd, this gathering, all of us, I don't think we need to, because this is an individual who truly needs no introduction. And as prominent as he is nationally, as prominent as he is internationally, for us in the capital region, Stephen Berk is our sage. Stephen Berk is our prophet. He is our tzaddik. He is a blessing to this community and to all things Jewish and Jewry here in the capital region and across the nation and world. It is my very rare honor and opportunity to be able to introduce to all of you Dr. Stephen Berk.
Thank you, Hank, and thank all of you for clicking in at this very, very difficult time for the state of Israel and for the Jewish people. Would you believe, my friends, that I'm going to begin my talk, and I will be as succinct as I possibly can, with the 3 words of a papal encyclical, All papal encyclicals are known by their first three words. And I'm referring to one that was made by Pope Pius XI in 1937. In German, it was mit brennender Sorge, with burning sorrow. He began this papal encyclical lamenting the growth of Nazi racism. And I'm here to tell you, mit brennender Sorge, with burning sorrow, I have to tell you what we already know. Israel is under siege, once again. This is another chapter in the long-standing Arab animosity directed towards Jews in what the Arabs call Philistine and what the Jewish people refer to as Eretz Yisrael. The crisis began not too long ago, less than 2 weeks ago, with, of course, developments within Jerusalem. Was it clumsy work by the Israeli police? It may have been somewhat clumsy, but I think people are unaware of some of the intricacies here. Israeli police were on the Temple Mount. There was rioting on the Temple Mount. The Israeli police fired tear gas. One of the reasons that the Israeli police took what may have been a heavy-handed position was that it was not infrequent that Arabs on the Temple Mount would throw down stones and rocks against Jews who were praying at the wall. Not a good thing. Were they doing it at that time? I can't tell you. I will tell you that in the vicinity of the wall, the president of Israel, Mr. Rivlin, was giving a speech. Was that about to be disrupted? I do not know. There was also a real estate dispute within the city of Jerusalem. I'm not an attorney, my friend Hank is an attorney, but it's a complex issue, and I would leave this to the Supreme Court of Israel. And then the rockets came. There is no moral equivalency, none whatsoever, between rioting and the putting down of riots, a real estate dispute in Jerusalem. There is no moral equivalency between that and the role of Hamas in sending rockets indiscriminately by the thousands aimed at Israeli civilians. The question arises, why did Hamas do what it did? I think the answer is fairly clear, and most analysts would agree upon what I'm about to tell you. The first of all is there is going to be the fact that Hamas wanted to weaken Israel. Here is something that I think some people outside of the Jewish community, and some people, I must say with regret, inside the Jewish community, don't come to understand, don't realize. Hamas is a genocidal organization. Hamas wants to destroy the state of Israel. No bones about that. Hamas has many, many deficiencies, many ambiguities, but on this particular issue, Hamas is clear. It's not the settlements, it's not an eviction notice in Jerusalem. If Israel withdrew from all of the settlements, Hamas would want to destroy the Jewish state. No one should have any doubts on it. It has said this again and again and again over the last 20 years. So that's one reason for the rockets. Another reason for the rockets will be that Hamas is in West Bank, within the state of Israel, and Palestinians all over the world, that Hamas, not Mahmoud Abbas, we're the ones that can take on Israel, and therefore you should support us. So again, for a variety of reasons, one is going to see Hamas attack Israel again and again and again. This is not the first time. At the end of the 1990s, Hamas launched suicide bombers against Israel, blowing up buses. Some of you may remember that. Hamas wants to destroy the state of Israel. When Hamas says, we are going to create a Palestinian state between the river and the sea, the river is the Jordan, the sea is the Mediterranean, and I'm not being condescending here, forgive me. You don't have to be a wizard of geography to understand that if there's a Palestinian state between the river and the sea, there is no room for Israel. The rockets are supplied to a very large extent by money. Money is supplied, and rockets come from Tehran. They come from Iran. Iran also wants the destruction of the state of Israel. There's a digital clock in Tehran that counts down from the year, minute by minute, from the year 2040. Because the government of the Ayatollahs has said sometime before 2040, Israel will be destroyed, implicitly saying we're going to help make that possible. So Iran is stoking the fires. Hamas has its own agenda. Iran has its agenda. They coincide with anything that will weaken the state of Israel. Again, with burning sorrow, I must tell you, this is a public relations disaster for Israel. Even though Israel is acting as any other country in the world would act, and that includes the United States of America. Imagine, my friends, if rockets were falling on us from Canada, God forbid, or from Mexico, God forbid, do you think the United States would not respond? Of course it would respond. And although the Israeli casualties are rather low, thank goodness for that, the fact of the matter is the country is paralyzed. People don't go to work. People have trouble getting to the hospitals. The country is in terror. It's fear. It's in fear. No government can tolerate a situation where people are afraid to get on buses, people are afraid to drive their cars, people are afraid to do their shopping. Israel had to act as it did. Now, I will also tell you the public relations disaster is virtually a fact of coming from that Hamas stations its rocket people and the rockets themselves. They fire from hospitals, they fire from schools, they fire from all sorts of places, and they fire from places where civilians are living. Succinctly put, Hamas uses its people in Gaza as human shields. There's no way that Israel can look good, despite the fact that Israel has done everything possible to minimize civilian casualties. Yes, the casualties are there. I'd be lying to you if I told you they weren't. And it would be foolish of me to deny the casualties, because you see them on television, you see them in the newspapers, the casualties are there. But the onus for the casualties really rests on Hamas. If you station rocket people, if you station people who are shooting rockets in civilian areas, civilians are going to die. Your own civilians are going to die. Hamas doesn't give a damn about that. So the Israelis respond, and they respond again in a humane position. You think it's a contradiction. How can you be humane in times of war? Well, the Israelis call up people in the apartment houses they're about to strike. The apartment houses are usually, in nearly every case, housing Hamas people, Hamas terrorists, who are launching, in some cases, the rockets, or planning for the launching of the rockets. The Israelis call them up. The Israelis drop leaflets in this very controversial thing that has caused Israel a good deal of difficulty. That is the attack upon a building housing the Associated Press and other press organizations. No one died, because Israel called people there, gave them an hour's warning. Now, I must tell you, among some of the things that I teach the history of World War II. And I talk to the students about strategic bombing. Precision bombing is an oxymoron. It never works. Do you think when we bombed Germany by day and the RAF, the Royal Air Force, bombed Germany by night, do you think we gave warning? No. Not only that, some of you may be surprised that during this crisis, most of the days during this crisis, Israel has continued to supply the people of Gaza with food and water, averting a true humanitarian crisis. Again, what I'm trying to say to you is that this is a very, very difficult position for Israel. Israel is acting as every country on this planet would act, and it is doing it more humanely, I would think, really more than any other country, once again, any other country on this planet would do, including our own. So I'm telling you, it's a public relations disaster. And where do you see that? You see it in the New York Times. To my mind, the New York Times has become a sophisticated tabloid. That's all it is. I subscribe to the Times. I want to see what they have to say because it has such great influence. But because I'm a faculty member at Union, I don't pay the $3 per day. I wouldn't pay $3 a day for the New York Times. So what does the Times do? It shows pictures all the time. It shows pictures all the time of the destruction in Gaza. Very few pictures of what's happening in Israel. And then we have the interviews with Times reporters in Gaza, and they're heartrending stories. There can be no doubt about that. Some people lost fathers, mothers. Some families have been killed. But where are the interviews with the Israelis who have suffered? With the Israelis who are frightened? Where are the interviews with the people in Sderot? Where are the interviews with the people in the Eshkol region, the sister region of the Jewish Federation of the Capital District? You don't find many there. And when the Times goes out and interviews people, I remember from last Wednesday, not this Wednesday, but the previous Wednesday, what do you get? Who do you get talking? So you get Martin Indyk. Martin Indyk is a former ambassador to the State of Israel, has been a long-time critic of Israel. And then you get Jeremy Ben-Ami from the allegedly pro-Israeli organization J Street. And again, you get criticism. And then you get criticism from a number of Democratic senators. You don't get, in that particular article that I read, there was no interview with a pro-Israeli senator, either a Democrat or a Republican. You didn't get anything like that. Be careful, my friends, with the New York Times. On two of the most important stories of the 20th century, the New York Times was out to lunch. Its reporter in the Soviet Union in the 1930s lied and apologized and distorted all of the news coming from the Soviet Union. He apologized for the collectivization of Soviet agriculture that took maybe as many as 7 million lives. He apologized for the purges. And you know what? He got a Pulitzer Prize. That's a warning. Be very, very careful. And the other story, of course, is, again, with the Holocaust. About 20 years ago, one of the more prominent editors of the New York Times, himself a German Jewish refugee, Max Frankel, apologized to the readers of the New York Times for all of the sins of omission of the Times during the Holocaust. Not reporting certain things, and of course, putting the news of the murder of Jews, when they talked about murdering Jews and not talking murder of other citizens, they put it on the inside pages or the back pages. Again, I'm telling you, be wary of the New York Times. There's only one Torah. That's on the beamer in the synagogue. The New York Times is not a secular Torah. And USA Today, the other day I looked at it, I get it on the iPhone, and what do I see? About 15 pictures, and 14 of them are dealing with the destruction in Gaza. Not very much, not very much at all. One picture perhaps on a destroyed house in Israel. Be careful. Be very, very careful. So as I said in the beginning, I said to you that this is not the culmination, but just another chapter in a long period of hostility of Arabs toward Jews settling within Palestine. It's very hard for a historian to begin a date of origin. When should I begin the story of the struggle between Jews and Arabs for Palestine? I would begin in the year 1947, 2 years after the Second World War. The British government, given by the League of Nations, had a mandate. The British controlled Palestine. But the British are hurting from the Second World War. England does not go off rationing until 1952. The British have trouble in Africa, in their colonies. And as everyone knows, Indian nationalism is rising very, very dramatically. The British want to get out of some of their foreign, let us say, adventures. And so, in 1947, the British government says to the new United Nations, enough is enough, you take care of it. This is now in the ball field or the ballpark of the new United Nations, which promptly formed UNSCOP, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. UNSCOP goes all around the world, its members interview Jews and Arabs and Christians, all Muslims, everybody is interviewed. And by the autumn of 1947, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine has come to the unremarkable conclusion that really the conflict, the tensions between Jews and Arabs in Palestine cannot be resolved in a binational state. The only way out is to give the Arabs a state and the Jews a state. And so UNSCOP recommends that to the United Nations General Assembly. And on November 29th of 1947, the United Nations General Assembly accepts Resolution 181. That is a resolution that partitions Palestine west of the River Jordan into a Jewish state and into an Arab state. The Zionist movement accepted it. It wasn't ecstatic about it, but it accepted it. The Zionist movement thought it should have more land in Palestine, but it accepted what it got. The Zionist movement took the half of the loaf of bread. The Palestinian leadership and the leadership of the Arab world said, no, it's all ours. We want the whole loaf of bread. Nobody has the right to take away a single inch of land in Palestine from us. No legitimization of Israeli claims to Palestine. There are Arab claims and there are Jewish claims. They have legitimate claims. The only way to resolve it was to create an Arab state and a Jewish state. Churchill would call this the hinge of fate. Had the Arabs accepted Resolution 181, there would not have been a terrible war in 1948. There would not have been the Nakba, the Arab word for the catastrophe. There would not have been a single Palestinian refugee. And we would be celebrating not only the 73rd anniversary of the State of Israel, but the 73rd anniversary of a Palestinian state. But the Arabs rejected it. Not only did they reject it, the leadership of the Palestinian Arab community in Palestine declared war on the Yishuv. That's the Hebrew word for the Jewish settlements in Palestine. And the leaders of Arab governments told Ben-Gurion, the future prime minister of Israel, who had said, we are going to create a state. The day after the British withdraw, we are going to create a state. And the leaders of the Arab countries said to Ben-Gurion and to the world and to the United Nations, the day after Ben-Gurion proclaims a Jewish state, we will invade it, destroy it, and throw the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea. It's a catastrophe for the Arab side. For reasons that we do not have to go into here, the Israelis are going to win. And as a result, there will be somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000 Palestinian refugees. Were they pushed out? Some of them were pushed out. Again, I'm an honest man. Some of the Palestinians were pushed out, particularly those in the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem corridor, because Arab villages on the hills overlooking the roads between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv would fire down on Israeli convoys. Yitzhak Rabin was the general in charge of that particular area, and he would evict the Arabs. But most of the Arabs left, not because they were cowards. Please do not misconstrue what I am saying. Not because they were cowards. Not because they were any less brave than the Jews who stood where they were. The difference is that the Arabs did what civilians always did in times of war. For those who are familiar with the history of the Second World War, you would see the pictures in 1940 as the German army rolled through the Netherlands and Belgium and into France. Hundreds of thousands of Belgians and Dutch and French and the French people got on the roads and moved. They thought they would find safety somewhere. The Arabs did the rational thing in Palestine. If you got a brain in your head, you don't want to be caught in fire between two sides. The difference between the Arabs and the Jews was the Arabs had a place to go. They could go to Jordan. They could go to Lebanon. They could go to Syria. They could go. There was a place for them. Unless the Jews could walk on the water of the Mediterranean and breathe under the Mediterranean Sea, there was no place for them to go. That's why they stood, that's why they fought, and that's why they won. Now, with the refugees, there are a number of things that have to be said. Forgive me for repeating myself. Had the Arab world and the Palestinian leadership accepted Resolution 181, there would not have been war after war after war, and there wouldn't have been a Palestinian refugee crisis. The other thing I would say to you is that seems to be the only refugee crisis that has not been solved by absorption of the refugees into other countries. In the early 1920s, Greece and Turkey fought a terrible, terrible war, a really brutal war with atrocities on both sides. When the war came to an end, the Turks living in Greece moved to Turkey. The Greeks living in Turkey moved to Greece. In 1946, the Czechoslovakian government, right after World War II, expelled 3 million German-speaking people from the Sudetenland, that area which was inhabited by German speakers in Czechoslovakia. All over Europe, Germans were expelled. Unfairly, you could argue, because most of them were not Nazis. Most of them were not guilty of any collaboration. But that's not the way the world saw it. East Europeans and Central Europeans saw it at the end of World War II. And you know what happened to those refugees? Nearly all of them came to what we used to call West Germany, and they were absorbed in West Germany. At the same time as the fighting over Israel was taking place, there was once again a brutal partition of the Indian subcontinent. Hindus living in the area that was destined to be Pakistan, they fled to India. Muslims that were in India, they fled to Pakistan. They were absorbed everywhere. The only group of refugees that was not absorbed into the countries to which they fled were the Palestinians. And I don't think that's any coincidence. They've been used as pawns against Israel. From those Palestinian refugees will come terrorists who will strike at Israel. And those Palestinian refugees tug at the heartstrings of people all over the world. Everywhere else, refugees were absorbed. And the final thing I will tell you about refugees, many people forget it. There's another refugee crisis that was spawned by the 48 war. 1 million Jews lived in Arab countries, in Yemen, in Syria, in Egypt, in Lebanon, Morocco. 1 million Jews, and nearly all of them were thrown out. There were pogroms. The Arab word for a pogrom is a fahud. There were pogroms all over. Rape, murder, destruction of property, mutilation of people. No one talks about those refugees. But those refugees, they are also. If the Palestinians are entitled to compensation of one sort or another, so too are the nearly 1 million Jews who are forced out of the Arab world. So, after my saying this to you, it didn't end. It was supposed to end in 1948 and 49 when the armistice was signed. But it didn't end. Because again and again, the Arab countries would refuse the olive branch that was handed out by Israel. So what happened? Another war. June 1967. Gamal Abdel Nasser tells the Israelis, we're going to push you into the sea. We're going to reverse the disgrace, the shame of the Nakba. You're finished. You're dead. It's all over for you. But it wasn't. We all know that. Was it divine intervention, as some religious people say? Was it the strength, the tenacity, the skill of the Israel Defense Forces that won the day in that 6-day war? I can't answer that. What I will tell you is that when the 6-day war was over, Moshe Dayan, the architect of victory, offered the olive branch to the Arabs. He told King Hussein, you can have it all back. Now, it's unlikely that Israel, after the 6-day war, would have given back Eastern Jerusalem. But the West Bank, Dayan said, you can have it all back. But we want a peace agreement. And what was the response of the Arab world? Leaders of the Arab countries went to Khartoum in the Sudan and said, these are the famous 3 no's: no negotiations, no recognition, and no peace with Israel. Hamas is in that continuum. It's a tragedy. It's an unending war. And underneath it all is the belief on the part of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and large numbers of Palestinians. There is no place for a Jewish state in even a truncated part of Palestine. In sum and in short, the Jews have no right to an independent state. So, I'll ask the old Russian question. Что делать? What is to be done in these circumstances? The first thing, as I told my students who seem to be under some pressure at Union, those who support Israel, Jewish and non-Jewish, I tell them, don't be afraid. This is the United States of America. The zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, might be moving against Israel. That makes it all the more important for supporters of Israel, both Jews and non-Jews, to rally to the defense of this first and only Jewish state in 2,000 years. It also means that it is necessary to really be proactive here. Every letter to the editor should be counted. Every call-ins to talk shows. And I'm amazed at what I'm about to tell you. A lot of the problems that Israel has in terms of public relations occur on the social media. We're in a new world. It's not only the New York Times, USA Today, the Washington Post. That's only one part of the problem. It's Facebook. It's TikTok. It's all of those social media that most of us really do not deal with, especially TikTok. But you know what? It's time. It's time that we get our hands a little bit dirty, in the sense we make our own TikToks. We respond on Facebook to those real verbal assaults, horrible assaults upon the state of Israel and upon the Jewish people. And I would also say to you, I'm going to say to you in the year 2021, when Napoleon said to the French people in the first years of the 19th century, and what von Clausewitz, the great German military theoretician, said to the Prussian people in the 18th century. I'm going to paraphrase it. Those men said that money is the artery of victory. Money is the artery of war. And I'm telling you that money is the artery of Jewish survival. It's money that will help rebuild the damaged places and the damaged psyches of Israelis. The Israelis are living in a perpetual state of siege. They need our help. They have always needed our help. Put another way, my friends. In 1940, in an even more dangerous time, a prominent rabbi got up and addressed the Jewish audience and said this: if you have a rendezvous with destiny, you better make sure you come on time. This is our time. This first and only Jewish state is under siege, attacked by people that we really were not accustomed to being attacked. Now, I might shock. Some people say I shouldn't say what I'm about to talk to you about, what I'm about to say to you. If you haven't caught my accent, I'm from the golden land of Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, you're born with a gene on chromosome 16 that codes for the Democratic Party. I'm a long-standing Democrat. I have voted Democratic in nearly every election, including the last one. I voted for President Biden. But the Democratic Party is a problem for me. The left wing of that party, this is not the Humphrey Jackson party. The old Democratic Party that we grew up with was a Democratic Party that was strongly supportive of Israel, and a Democratic Party that always condemned anti-Semitism. Now we have anti-Semites, Democratic anti-Semites in the American Congress. That's a problem for us. So what should one do? You can become politically proactive. You make it clear to Congressman Tonko, among others. Where do you stand here, Congressman? Where do you stand? And I must say, I am very, very much surprised by the absence of Chuck Schumer. Fairness dictates that I say to you, nobody has been more pro-Israeli in the American Senate going back 30 years than Senator Schumer. But he's silent now. No mystery here. The growing left-wing strength in the Democratic Party frightens these people. They're frightened of being challenged in primaries. So let them know. Let them know, my friends. Let them know we are not going to tolerate criticism, yes, but assaults using anti-Semitic tropes, that is inconceivable. It's time to stand up. Wherever you stand, whatever position you take politically, liberal or conservative, there should be no toleration of anti-Semitism and vehement anti-Israeli sentiment anywhere in the United States. It's grim times, my friends. So let me say to you, first of all, we've been through worse before. We will get through this. Our cause is just. Israel is the only democratic state in the Middle East. The only one. The only country in the world, the only country in the Middle East, the only government that is in 2,000 years of the history of Palestine has guaranteed free access to the holy places of the three monotheistic religions. That's the government of Israel. Israel has been the place of refuge for millions of our people. And now that place of refuge is under attack. So, if you're a supporter of Israel, if you're a supporter, think about Israel tonight. If you have children, brothers and sisters, grandchildren, friends in the state of Israel, pray for them tonight. Shalom uvracha. Peace and a blessing to all of you. Thank you very much for listening.
Dr. Berk has done for all of us this evening with a clarity and passion and vision. He has demonstrated to us what the stakes are today in Israel in light of the latest outbreaks of violence and terrorism. He has shown us how grave is the threat now facing Israel. He has highlighted the challenges, immense though they are, that Israel now faces. And he has showed us what must be done for Israel to address those challenges and for us to help it. What I want to spend just one moment speaking with you about today is my own sense of why we are here this evening and what our obligation is to ourselves, to our community, and to our brothers and sisters in Israel. Why have we survived? Why have the Jewish people survived for 4,000 years? Why have we survived, as the Passover Haggadah has reminded us every year, that in every generation our enemies will rise up against us and try to destroy us? How have we survived? We have survived because we have had in our DNA and our bones a sense of community, an understanding of the need on evenings like tonight to come together. We have survived because we've understood better than any people throughout the history of the world the need for us to defend one another, to defend Israel, to defend Judaism and the Jewish people. What is our obligation? Our obligation is today, as it has been throughout our history, it is to appreciate and recognize, as Dr. Berk has shown us, that if one Jew suffers anywhere, all Jews suffer everywhere. Why are we here? What is our obligation? It is to honor the legacy of our mothers and fathers and their mothers and fathers. It is to stand for Israel and the Jewish people, as we always have and as we always will. As I said, it's who we are. It's what we do. It's in our bones. It is what makes us extraordinary and remarkable amongst so many of the qualities that make the Jewish people extraordinary and remarkable and survivors throughout the worst that history could hand us. And so tonight, as Dr. Berk said, we ask all of you to support Israel in every way you can. But in time of war, as Dr. Berk said, the way you can and have the greatest impact is through money, through digging as deeply as you can into your pockets and supporting Israel. And those funds will go to the worthiest of causes in Israel. The dollars that you give this evening and the days to come will support the Victims of Terror Fund, a unique fund that provides immediate cash relief to the victims and their families within 24 hours of a terrorist attack. Your dollars will support recently arrived Ethiopian immigrants who are experiencing the extraordinary trauma of violence. Your dollars will support our children, American students who have just arrived in Israel and are facing the trauma of war. Your dollars will support the Israeli Trauma Coalition. It will support social welfare programs, and it will send a message to the world that tonight, as throughout our history, we stand together as one. You should have all received an email from the Federation that will provide a link where you can make a contribution. If you haven't, you can find links and information on the Federation website. And so, as Dr. Berk showed us tonight, is for us our moment to stand behind Israel, to support it every way we can. On behalf of the United Jewish Federation for Northeastern New York, it is my privilege to thank all of you for joining us this evening. God bless all of you. God bless America. God bless Israel. Good night, and God bless.